Hello, everyone, and welcome to Inside HR. I'm James Marsh. Thank you so much for joining us for today. For the next hour, as we're going to look at how to build a winning workforce through diversity and inclusion in partnership with our partners today, iCIMS. Diversity is a proven investment in a company's success. International research argues that diversity is an important driver of business performance and a key factor to boost engagement and employee satisfaction as well. So how can organizations craft better inclusion and diversity strategies to gain that competitive edge? And so to my guest this morning, now obviously you can see on the screen there we have two guests listed this morning, both joining us from the US, but we are actually having a problem connecting with Amber at the moment. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Shannon Lee instead, who's the Associate Director of Culture, Belonging, Inclusion and Diversity at iCIMS. He says in the game of life, Shannon helps those around him up their high score by implementing engaging, empowering and insightful professional development strategies. At iCIMS, Shannon helps launch I Belong, a grassroots employee resource group, and in his current role, he directs the articulation and implementation, easy for me to say, of iCIMS' approach to D&I. Shannon, it's good afternoon from me. I'm guessing it's good morning for you. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, James. Thank you so much. It is a good morning as we were talking behind the scenes. It is a nice and warm day and the sun is out, so I'm excited.
Where is this place where the sun is out? This seems totally foreign to us in London in March.
I am in New Jersey. I've had the privilege of being in New Jersey for the last 20 years. So I didn't grow up here, but I've been here so long that I feel like I am a true New Jerseyan.
Fabulous. All right. Well, so we've got myself in London, we've got Shannon in New Jersey, and we're hoping to be joined by Amber Brown as well, who we're struggling to connect to at the moment. If and when she arrives, we'll introduce her as well. But what I would like to do first is just talk a little bit about what we're going to do today with you, Shannon. So we've got our speaker slide up there at the moment, we basically want to talk about how what diversity inclusion is, or how you see it at iCIMS, and then talk about how that can influence all aspects of your business, but particularly with regard to recruitment as well. Would that be a sort of a fair summation of the next hour, Shannon?
That sounds great, James.
Great stuff. And as is often traditional on Inside HR, we're going to start off with our first poll. We're going to ask our audience, please do get involved with this. You can do this by clicking on this little bar chart icon that you can see on the right of your slide deck there. If you click on that, you can access the poll. And we're asking, what is the biggest challenge you're facing when trying to build a diverse and inclusive recruitment process? Is it A, buy-in from senior leaders? Is it not having the right tools or knowledge to do this in-house? Is it C, finding a solution with the right capabilities? Is it D, budget, as it often is, particularly with smaller businesses? Or is it E, a lack of candidates or talent pools? You're just struggling to find the right talent for your business. So please do get involved with that, because that will shape my chat with Shannon over the next sort of 15, 20 minutes or so. We'll leave that open for a little while. So please do get involved with that. So Shannon, let's jump straight in. And I guess it's probably worth setting the scene first in terms of diversity inclusion and what your understanding at iCIMS is of what D&I really means, and where it sits now in terms of the business agenda at the moment.
So great question. There are a couple of ways that we tend to approach it. So our framework of culture, belonging, inclusion, and diversity is our iCIMS's approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So let me kind of take a step back with diversity. I know a lot of times when we talk about diversity, especially in the States, people tend to focus on either race or gender, but diversity represents a whole magnitude of things. The way I tend to look at it is, how were you born? What are the decisions that you made? And what are the experiences that you've had? That is what helps shape you and gives you a unique perspective that no one else has. So you could be looking at two identical twins, but based on the decisions that they've made and the choice and the experiences that they've had, they're going to have two very different life experiences. So one of the things, and I'll, kind of talk through each one of these points on some of the research that was done. So this very first number, 35%. 35% of organizations are more likely to outperform their competitors because they are diverse. So when you're diverse,
I was going to say, Chanel, that's really interesting. So just unpack that a little bit for us. What does that mean in terms of outperformance, and where does that outperformance come from?
so that outperformance comes in a multitude of areas. So one, diversity, I mean, not diversity, but innovation, where
Mhm.
you're getting different inputs from different people. You tend to be able to innovate more and more quickly. I'm not sure about you, James, but I'm a huge fan of improvisational comedy. And one of the tenets of improv is bring a brick and not a cathedral. So if you and I are co-creating this scene, it's
Yeah.
better if I bring a little bit, you bring a little bit, and now we end up with a better outcome than if I just say, hey, James, this is what we're going to do. And now you have to react and respond to that. So
Mhm.
diversity brings in a lot of innovation.
Mhm.
Another thing is that it brings higher employee engagement when there are multiple ways to connect people to your organization. Be it if I'm able to find a group of, for me, over 40 Black men, or if I'm able to find a group of caregivers. So I have my mom living with me, and I also have my kids living with me. If I'm
Mhm.
able to find a group of parents who are homeschooling their kids, these are all different ways that I can be connected and engaged to the organization. And then the final one is all about the bottom line. I know a lot of our executives are, how does this help us make more money? Again, you're able to produce greater products with more innovation and less turnover. And you're able to go out and sell and pitch to the market in ways that you were never able to do before.
This is the crazy thing, isn't it? That a lot of the research, and I know that we talked in our preparation for this week about a lot of the research that's been
Mhm.
done by different groups. I know there's a Gallup survey that we talked about, and a few other bits. That there is a direct impact on bottom line. That's the key message, isn't it?
Yes, yes, and very so when I do sessions like this, we often start with the business case for diversity. It would be interesting for someone to present the business case of keeping things the same, of having a homogenous workforce. What does that business case
Yeah.
look like? And usually you'll find that we don't want to go down that route. But to your point, the bottom line is going to be impacted in a positive way by having more diverse people in your organization.
Just before we continue, we got a brief
Mhm.
glimpse of her there. I'm aware that Amber has joined us. Amber, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing okay. Can you all hear me?
Very, yes, we
Perfect.
can indeed. So, Amber, let me run through the intro that I missed out earlier. So, Amber is an entrepreneur at heart, finding new ways to solve problems and foster product innovation that makes a difference at iCIMS. She's got 5 years of increasing responsibility in software technology, ranging from customer enablement to product engineering. During her time at iCIMS, she spearheaded product launches from inception to reality, and she's also a founding member of I Belong, which is the product that Chanel was involved in creating as well. The iCIMS Diversity and Inclusion Steering Committee, which bridges the gap between diversity and inclusion and tech. She holds an MBA in focused analytics from the Rutgers Business School in New Jersey, US. So, Amber, thank you so much for joining us. And I know that you've got you're going to be giving us a little tour of iCIMS D&I solution later on in the hour.
Absolutely, I will. Thank you for the introduction, and I'm excited to be with everyone today.
Great. No, it's a pleasure to have you with us, and sorry that you had some slight technical issues beforehand. With Chanel, let's return
Mhm.
to talking about sort of setting the scene in terms of diversity and inclusion. And if we move on sort of here, you feel that there are sort of a number of considerations to building a high performance team. And do you want to just sort of talk us a little bit through what they are?
Sure. So if we think about, so we talked about the impact on the bottom line, but we also looked at the notion of higher collaboration and improving that that client base. Now, if we look, thank you for bringing this up, James. There are multiple considerations. Like I mentioned in the intro, diversity is not just the color of my skin or my assigned gender at birth. There are so many other dimensions. And truth be told, we listed 8. but there could be so many more. So if you think about diversity of age, does your organization represent the area where you are? Do you have your Gen Zs, your millennials, all the way up to your baby boomers? And maybe in some organizations, you might even have folks that are from what we call the silent generation. But do you have that? Because if you are top heavy in any one group, you are missing out not only on vital information, but also vital ways to connect with your client base. There's also diversity of ability. People's ability to interact with the world is another way that you can express diversity. We are in the midst of planning it's called Global Accessibility Awareness Day. So this is happening in, I believe, in April or May, but it's an opportunity for us at iCIMS and other organizations worldwide to look at ways to make their products more accessible to people based on various ways that they interact with the world. There's a famous or well-known cable company in the US where, based on one of their employee resource groups that was aimed at people of varying degrees of ability, they were able to come up with a product where you can press a button on the remote and you can talk into it to tell the your cable box what you wanted it to pull up. And that was all birthed out of working with people with different abilities. You've got diversity of gender. We in the US and I think around the world, we celebrated International Women's Day earlier this week on Monday, I believe it was. And making sure that you have these perspectives and these thoughts and these ideas in the workplace are huge. There's also the notion of sexual orientation. Again, this gives us an opportunity to access different customer bases that we may not have been able to access before, not only in terms of being able to pitch and promote our products, but also making sure that we're giving them the best customer service experience so that they don't go to a different organization. Diversity of location. This has been really big, I'll say, in the States, where you have a number of people with the pandemic and with Wi-Fi being as pervasive as it is throughout most of the US. You see people that are packing up and going into their RVs, and they are driving across the country, making these road trips while still being extremely productive in their workplace. Well, guess what? These people, when I am going to a different part of the country, if I live in a different part of the country or in a different part of the world, I am going to see things and experience things differently. And being able to share that and incorporate it into your products is going to be a great way to do that. We've mentioned diversity of race, and then making sure that when you are working with people, you are being mindful of all of these dimensions, including diversity of life experience. So I'll tell you that for me, early on in looking at D&I thought diversity of age and diversity of life experience, how are those really different? But I like the fact that they were teased out here, because I can have a ton of life experience, but I don't necessarily have to be 50, 60, 70 years old. There are a lot of folks who have packed literally a life's worth of living in a short 10, 15, 25-year lifespan. So being able to share that in the workplace, these are all different ways that we can work diversity into our platform. Now, these, James, I called out one by one.
Yeah.
But then there's this notion of intersectionality. So maybe I am a Black person with a ton of living experience, and I mean a ton of life experience, and I might be gay. So these are all different ways that people become so unique because of this notion of intersectionality. And the better we can understand that, the better we're able to reach our customers exactly where they are, to give them what they need.
And this process, Shannon, and talking about this, it does force everyone from wherever they sit in an organization and wherever they sit in terms of diversity in the 8 categories that you talked about there. It does force us to confront what could be conscious but are more likely to be unconscious biases about different people. How does what role does unconscious bias play in this, with according to the research you've done at iCIMS?
Sure. So unconscious bias at its very essence is that I make decisions without necessarily thinking about them. So I don't have to think in order to breathe. I don't have to think in order for my eyes to blink. It just happens.
Mm-hmm.
So with unconscious bias, when I see someone, as I'm looking at the images that you have here, some thoughts and some ideas and some conclusions are being drawn about each one of these individuals. So I want to pause for a second. I believe that unconscious bias has gotten a bad rap, that if you have unconscious bias, then you're a bad person.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that's not the case. We all have bias and we all have unconscious bias. So the way that I tend to tease it out is, if my children are playing a soccer game and I'm a referee, I'm obviously going to want my children's team to win. So there's that unconscious bias, that bias at play. I love kids, but I love my kids just a little bit more. Now, where I have to be careful is, if I'm supposed to be a referee, I have to be impartial. So knowing that my kids are playing, I still have to referee the game as fair and equitable as possible. So again, if I'm interviewing these three people, I may have a certain affinity, if you will, towards each one of them for various reasons, but I have to set those aside and then begin to judge them based on their merit and their potential. So unconscious bias doesn't make you a bad person. It just makes you human. It's when we're not aware of it, or when we say, well, I don't have a bias, that's where we start to get into trouble. And I believe that, and I think we'll talk about this a little bit later, and I believe that in the hiring process, if you will, having multiple points of view about each one of these candidates is going to help keep those biases in check.
And that's the key point, isn't it? You're still able to referee that game of, we would call it football here, I'm guessing.
Yes.
You're still able to referee that game and referee that game fairly, even though you're in a market or an environment or surrounded by a group of people to whom you would naturally want to favor over others.
Exactly.
No, sorry, Shannon, I was just going to say, yeah, it's that's the key point, isn't it? I just wanted to draw attention to the polls again. We're just close the first one. This is really interesting. Here we go. Oh, ask this on the screen. Here we go. So we asked what the biggest challenges our audience were facing when they were trying to build a diverse and inclusive recruitment process. 9% saying buy-in from senior leaders. 18%, saying don't have the right tools or knowledge to operate this in-house. 13%, finding a solution with the right capabilities. And hopefully this morning you've come to the right place with items who are market leaders in that area. So hopefully we'll reduce that number as we go through the hour. Just 3% talking about budget, which is really interesting, actually. Normally budget is something that factors higher in some polling that we do on Inside HR when we talk about various technology-based solutions. Budget is normally a bigger barrier. Just 3% saying that. Today, where 55%, over half of our audience, are talking about lack of candidates or lack of a big enough talent pool. Does that surprise you, Shannon, when you look at those results?
It does. When I initially saw it, I thought that either senior leadership or budget were going to be the higher, and they actually are the laggards in this particular poll. And so folks saying that the lack of candidates or talented pools does strike me as a bit surprising. I know that some of the stuff that Amber is going to go over today is going to give folks ideas on how they can expand that talent pool, but there are definitely ways that we can do this. Some are going to be based around technology, and some of them may be challenging our bias, where, I was literally on a call last week, James, with an HR recruiter who recruits in the technology space. And they said that for the work that we do, we can only recruit from these 4 schools. We can only recruit from these 4 schools. And so when you're asking them, well, do you have any Black people? Do you have any Latino people? Do you have any women that are a part of those programs? Well, no, they don't go to those schools. So then don't be surprised if you're not getting the candidates if you're fishing in the same ponds as you've always fished. So expanding where we can find those candidates, I think, is going to be really key for us to make sure that we're driving not only diversity and inclusion, but also this thought of equity in the workplace. So yeah, I'm a bit surprised that candidate pools were a bit higher.
Is that still quite common in the States that you'll find, this is awful. The only example I can think of this is a well-known legal-based drama set in New York where there's a law firm that only hired from Harvard. I'm probably going to give it away, but yeah, is that still quite a common thing?
It still is common. It's becoming less and less common. Again, as conversations like this are going on around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think that people are now moving from this notion of awareness into action. I think we are beginning to widen those talent pools. I believe that people are starting to expand their recruiting efforts, but it's still higher than I would like it to be.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sorry
Sorry.
to cut you off, but so if I think about the example of iCIMS, I'm talking to our former leader of talent acquisition, and there are companies that would say, you know what, we're only going to recruit people that are 20 miles away from headquarters. 20 miles away from headquarters, we're going to find great talent. I live 25 miles away from headquarters. Still a commutable distance back when we could commute. But if that geo fence had always been left up, I would not have been, brought to the attention of iCIMS because I lived literally 5 miles outside. And I think that I've made some significant contributions in my 5+ year career here. So expanding those talent pools and understanding, for me, I'll pause here for a second. For me, in years past, recruiting and talent acquisition has been a lot about filtering folks out. And I think now we're starting to move towards how do we filter in the most qualified candidates and then choose the best candidate for the role.
Absolutely. We're going to move on and ask our audience another poll.
Mm-hmm.
So let me pop the slide deck back up onto the screen, and we're going to talk about what will be your next step in creating a more diverse and inclusive recruitment process. Is it going to be an internal D&I training program? Is it going to be reaching new talent pools through different channels? Is it going to be sourcing a suitable solution to help? So that's the 13% of you in the first poll. You're going to be looking to do that. Is it going to be restructuring the whole recruitment process, to tear it down and rebuild it? Or is it going to be a combination of all of the above? So involved voting in that as well, and that will help Shannon and Amber and I see where you guys are in your organisations with your D&I as relates to recruitment. Shannon, let's move it on, and let's talk a little bit about how companies can do this, can start to put this diverse and inclusive strategy into place. I know that in our prep call, we talked a little bit about all the research that's been going on in this area. Just tell me what you've been looking at iCIMS, the trends you've been looking at, and move that into what organizations that you're working with are doing to embrace D&I, both as part of their recruitment and just part of their general overall organizational strategy.
Sure. So a lot of the research, similar to what we laid out before, one of the big players in this space is the consulting firm McKinsey. And so they just continue to reaffirm almost year over year the case for both gender and ethnic and cultural diversity in corporate leadership, which is huge. But I think a lot of times when people think of, I want to begin to hire a more diverse workforce, what I've heard in my conversations and what I've seen in my own research is a lot of times people start at those entry-level jobs, those folks right out of college or right out of high school or university, pretty much the entry level. And I'm not saying that we don't want to bring those folks in. I would say that another way to expand on our ability to attract, engage, and hire the right talent is to also look at folks that are mid-career, folks that are already in middle leadership and senior leadership positions.
I was going to ask about this. So actually, my role in the organization I work for is learning and development focused. What role does L&D play here, as well as, because obviously we've focused on recruitment, and that's where Amber is going to focus shortly in terms of the product demo that she's going to provide our audience. But what role does internal development to those existing employees and managers up and down the line? What role does that play?
So we are definitely two peas in a pod, James. I started my career at iCIMS in the talent development space, so it is a place that is very near and dear to my heart. For me, as a candidate, as we're talking to our candidates, can we articulate not only what the day-to-day role is for them, but also their ability to move and advance their career in the organization? Do you have internal training programs? So I'm a huge fan of that face-to-face instructor-led. I'm a huge fan of jumping on a Zoom or WebLink or WebEx and facilitating a training there. But also, are there any asynchronous ways or self-guided opportunities? We've partnered with a major organization for our employees, where they can just go and take pretty much any training under the sun that they want on any topic. So are there opportunities for people to advance their career through professional development? Now, professional development doesn't end with classroom training.
Mm-hmm.
Are there mentorship programs? Are there sponsorship programs? I would even say at the senior leadership, are there opportunities for them to connect and work with a personal coach or a business coach to help them kind of navigate the waters and give them that outsider's view on helping them with their career? So those are some of the things that I tend to look for when I am interviewing with a company. And if my boss, Jules, sees this, I am not interviewing, but in the past, when I was, those are some of the things that I would look for, and know that a lot of times what we find is people who are not a part of the majority in an organization, people who are not a part of the majority of an organization may not have the same social capital that people who are a part of the majority do have. So what programs do we have to help level that playing field? And this is where, when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, this is where that E comes in. And a lot of times people say, well, everything should be equal. And to a certain degree, I agree. But I think my point of contention is, in order for things to be equal, the presupposition is that we all started at the same place. And chances are we did not. So there's this graphic that I use in one of our e-learnings where you've got 5 people all riding a bike. There are different heights, different sizes, different ages, and there's one person who uses a wheelchair. But if I gave all of them the same bike, it's going to fit one of those 5 people just right. Someone else, the bike is too small, too large, and it doesn't meet their needs. So equity doesn't mean that everything is the same. It just means that you're giving everyone what they need to succeed, even though those things may be slightly different.
It's a really interesting idea, isn't it? That equal doesn't necessarily mean the same, and often doesn't mean the same.
It doesn't.
Just to talk to me a little bit as well, because obviously this is going to permeate. This needs to permeate all other parts of the people management function, right? And when we talk, when I hear the word equal and equity and equality, my mind drifts towards compensation and benefits and payroll effectively as well. Just talk about how that intersects with this.
So that is really good. What we find is that, and I'll speak generally for the states. Again, no, people who are not a part of the majority, whether it be the ethnic majority, gender majority, etc., they tend to be paid a little bit less. So now, if I go back to the unconscious bias thing, well, I like Amber a little bit more than I like James, or I like James a little bit more than I like Amber. So as a manager, I do have an enormous amount of control over people's compensation. I have an enormous amount of control over their ability to kind of maneuver within the organization. When I am passing out the really plum projects, am I giving them more to James because he's a talent development specialist, or am I giving them more to Amber because we both live in New Jersey? So these are all things that we've got to consider with that. And as you know, when you're promoted, then pay comes with that. So the companies that I think are really doing it well are doing having some real tough conversations around pay equity and seeing, is everyone in this band, are they being paid equitably? And also looking at your retention rates. Are people who are not a part of the majority, are they being judged more harshly in the performance reviews? Are they being terminated more frequently than people who are a part of the majority as well? So pay equity is definitely a huge portion of this.
And it's interesting you talked about projects and promotions as well. These aren't just decisions that are being made in a strategy meeting at the beginning of Q1 or whatever it is. On the ground, day-to-day decisions as well that can really affect how this works.
Absolutely correct.
All right. Well, Amber, I'd love to bring you in at this point and get you to talk a little bit about iSIM specifically. So this is a little bit of a departure from what we would normally do on Inside HR. I mean, the first departure is that our audience can see me, which I don't know why that we decided that was a good idea. But no, we're going to do something slightly different now, and we're going to ask Amber to do a little bit of a demonstration just to bring to life exactly what Shannon and I have been talking about over the first 30 minutes. Today. I keep wanting to say this afternoon, and then I remember that it's this morning for you guys. Amber, take it away. Just tell us a little bit about what you're going to talk us through, and then I'll hand over the reins and let you take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to be talking to you all about our DE&I philosophy within the iSIMS Talent Cloud. Mm-hmm. So what that means is that we have a design-led approach that talks about how one would have a more successful outcome for DE&I if they looked at the entire talent continuum and tried to address these areas of inequity throughout. So I actually pulled the poll that you just asked, the answers from that poll, and I put it in the slide because I would like to see if we did this poll again at the end, if we could kind of change people's thought process. So
interesting. That poll is still open, by the way. So if you haven't voted in that, please do get involved now. We have had loads of you vote in that, and yeah, the results are quite interesting. But we won't do those yet. I'll let you finish first, Amber, and then we'll go and look back at them.
No problem. So feel free to ask me any questions along the way. I have a few slides that I will show before I get into the demo, and you can see my screen, correct?
We've just lost that for a second. If you just want to share screen again.
Okay, here we go.
Perfect.
Very disturbing for our audience. My face keeps reappearing. It's awful for them. So yeah, we've got your slides now. So yeah, take us through these slides and then into the actual demo that you're going to do.
Okay, great. So within the iSIMS Talent Cloud, we consider DE&I a target area of focus for us at all layers of the tech stack, whether it be the experiences that we supply for candidates, the applications that the users interact with on the day-to-day as they're working their recs and such, all the way down to the platform layer that supplies the intelligence for our technology. DEI has a seat at the table throughout, and that's really important when you're looking at bringing a holistic solution to the market. So to do that, we are guided by these core principles that you see here. There are 5. We're committed to being a market leader in this space, but not at the expense of being socially conscious. What that means is that while anybody can build some type of tool that increases, representation or targets one group and puts them in a hire, that's not what we're after, right? We want to make sure that we're not deploying tools that have an adverse effect. So we want to maintain quality of hire, also while increasing diversity. So it's a nice, delicate balance, and we want to do it in an ethical way. The next thing is the hypersensitivity to a candidate. So we are a B2B company, and obviously we're committed to helping our customers build a winning workforce, right, through acquiring diverse talent. But we have to, when we're thinking of DE&I within our portfolio, we are hypersensitive to the candidates and the challenges that they face, and we build technology with them in mind first. Whereas within TA, you would probably build with the recruiter or hiring managers in mind first. Then we have this concept of being integrated and measurable. If you are going to introduce something new to the users, you might have an issue with change management, or people might feel that it's an extra burden. And so with DE&I, we just think to get the best outcome, this needs to be part of your day-to-day. And finally, being measurable. You don't know where you're going if you can't measure where you are. And as you're deploying these solutions or capabilities, rather, to see how you are tracking and progressing over time is critical for you to be able to pivot or to communicate to leadership that the dollars are well spent, to the point raised earlier in the poll. So we measure everything throughout. Okay?
Great.
So how did we kind of come to what I'm going to walk you through? We didn't just sit virtually in a room and kind of bounce ideas off of each other. We went out into the market and we spoke to analysts, customers, prospects. We read tons of literature on AI and how it could have adverse effects on DE&I. And we had like focus groups and research, innovation lab sessions, and we really think we came to a comprehensive solution. And you'll notice here a lot of logos from the local markets in your area. We wanted to get outside of the bubble of the US. And so we spent a little bit of time with customers and prospects in the US and a lot of time in the UK and multinational markets. So what were the summary of the findings based on all of our customer interviews? Customer interviews is exactly what it sounds like. We would set up an hour with customers and prospects, and we would ask them so many different questions as it pertains to DE&I, from a philosophical question all the way down to the nuts and bolts of the tools and technologies and data capture. And so I'll go through a few of these points at a high level, but we recognize that in the UK, generically speaking, from the customers we had engaged with, that there tended to be a more expansive list of questions when you were asking someone to identify their self-identified data, right? So instead of it just being what you would have in the US, like your race would be Black, white, Asian, Latin, etc., there tend to be like a list of 15 options. And we found that that was more inclusive than what typically is done here in the US. And oftentimes multinationals started using that list as a way to expand the options across the board. Right. Another thing that we saw is that there were customers in the UK that really were challenging the norm of questions that you would ask beyond your race and gender. And so we've seen things like religion, transgender, social mobility, and the opt-in rates were profound. I mean, you wouldn't think data as sensitive as what you see on the screen would be stuff that people are willing to share, but they were. And I think a large attribution to the opt-in rates is just authentically and transparently communicating why you need this data. Your emphasis on DE&I to your candidates will go a long way.
That's really interesting, Amber. I was just going to say that the idea that the British people are more forthcoming than perhaps the US candidates about different aspects of their own diversity or what have you, those different criteria that you asked about, is quite interesting. I'm not sure necessarily everyone would have thought that British culture would be naturally more forthcoming than the US. Is that something that you can see quite clearly from your findings?
Yeah, I mean, we polled about 30 customers, and I would say of those 30 customers, about 17 of them were UK based. So, I mean, we're kind of seeing these trends among those customers. And I mean, I think time will tell, right? Does this tend to increase over time? If we did the same study next year, what would we find? So it's very interesting for sure.
Well, there we go. We can book it now. We'll bring you back in a year and you can tell us all about it.
And opt-out is critical, right? Just making sure that, they are asking a more expansive list of questions, and the opt-out is critical. But one thing I will say that kind of answers your previous question but relates to opt-out is that I think one of the reasons why you might have a stronger opt-in is because you're providing more options for people to identify truly how they would identify versus checking a box to feed it in a data system, which tends to be what happens when you're applying for a job in the US. Okay, when we look at the broader EMEA markets, so this typically was a UK-based customer that also recruited in the broader EMEA market. Right. We did not look at US-based customers that serve these markets because we felt like it might have been too skewed towards the information we already knew. So what we found is that contract and agency work presented a large issue with data collection, but then also there were a lot of countries that you couldn't ask protected characteristics. So this is something we'll have to continue to look at how we would solve this. We need to provide enough flexibility so that way we don't have this one-size-fits-all approach when you're working with agencies or hyper-local markets that have their own governance on what things that you can and cannot ask. Okay. All right. So as I mentioned very quickly, we consider DE&I a design philosophy, and we're committed to boosting outcomes from source to advancement. So no more of that point solution where you say, I'm going to deploy this one thing, resume redaction, which is great. We'll show that today. But there's so much more that you need to do in order to elevate this experience, and finally placing an emphasis on our candidates. Right? So the three things that our technology allows you to do is diversify top of the funnel, because diversity sourced is diversity hired. So the individuals who polled and mentioned that they want to tap into new sources, that's a great thing. Providing equitable experiences, because a one-size-fits-all strategy drives away historically excluded groups. What this means is, just as you would tailor your process to acquire contingent workers or go on an executive search, you would want the same customization and tailoring to historically excluded groups. Again, to Shanor's point, that concept of equity. So for those of you who said you were not willing to restructure your whole or only 2% of you, I think at the time, said you would consider restructuring your whole process, you probably haven't seen success because you haven't looked at it from that lens. I'm here to tell you, you should probably consider restructuring your whole process to deploy maybe a pilot for DE&I using some of the frameworks we'll talk about. And then finally, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say that number's crept up to 6%. So
okay. Okay.
But still, you're in the right ballpark.
Yeah. And then finally, addressing a leaky bucket through bias mitigation. So this concept of measuring, being able to pull the data, analyze where your gaps are, and deploy improvements. So again, at that time, 6%, there you go, mentioned you would restructure the whole recruitment process. Yeah. I have this preceding this slide because at iCIMS, we have a specific design philosophy from the top of the funnel all the way through advancement, which is internal mobility. And at each stage of the process, we deploy something that helps address bias, remove a barrier, or address a psychological phenomena that tends to decrease diversity, right? And so I won't go through all of this. A little plug is that in HR Tech, I will be diving into each of these bullets here in detail. So if you wanted to join that session, for sure, please register. But this is how we think of DE&I. It's literally its own set of practices that you would deploy for the most optimal DE&I outcomes. The way that we bring this to market, either we build this natively in certain areas like Redaction, you'll see that's part of iCIMS native technology, or we have partners that we integrate that supply a capability at a specific step of the process. Okay. So I'll pause there for questions, and we'll just jump into a 2-minute demo for resume redaction to wrap up.
Well, I'm going to tell you what, why don't you jump into the demo now? And we have got some questions coming in, and what I'll do is I'll save those and I'll pop those. I'll give those to both of you after we've done the demo. We've set aside some time after that. So yeah, by all means, feel free to jump into the demo quickly, and we've got about sort of 7 or 8 minutes or so before we'll then go through some of our audience questions.
Great. So one of the items along the journey that you saw was resume redaction. So the idea is that you have all of these things you're doing at the top of the funnel to diversify the top of the funnel. Again, if you would like the details, you could always join HR Tech for the more detailed outline. But once those individuals get in the top of the funnel, there's this concept of bias, which Shanor mentioned earlier. I like to think about it as cognitive shortcuts that you take to be very efficient, something that you're subconsciously doing. These cognitive shortcuts can be mitigated when introducing a redacted resume. And that's because we are only presenting data that's important for you to make your first decision about the profile. And that data might be a summary of one's skills, capabilities, and experience. We are removing data that could lead to potential bias, such as one's name, institution that somebody went to. Again, to your point earlier about only recruiting from the Harvards of the world. So when you log into the iCIMS experience, we have 2 options for redaction: the recruiter experience and the hiring manager experience. So when a recruiter logs in, if redaction was enabled, they would be met with a little snack bar here that lets them know they're in a redacted mode. And then, and then you'll notice that the primary identifier is the person's system ID. If I went ahead and clicked on this person's record, I would be able to see all of the information about their skills and experience as it relates to the their jobs and their qualifications, but not necessarily the university that they went to, or their first name, their last name, their zip code, etc. Okay, from here, I am able to advance this person to schedule a phone screen. Now, because I am going to schedule the phone screen, I'm going to need to see who this person is. And so we don't want to impact the recruiter in terms of making it like a brick wall to disrupt their flow of work. We're just saying, upon first decision, we'll redact it, and then you can see who they are. Okay. And then a final step that you can take here is, let's say you wanted to implement this for recruiters and for hiring managers. We have the option for you to share a resume in a redacted state or share the original resume with hiring managers. So you could also only implement it for sharing, or you could do it for both. And then the redacted resume would simply attach to your email, and your hiring manager will be able to review the information in that protected state.
Mm-hmm.
All of this is trackable for analytics, so we'll be able to show you who progresses in a redacted state and who doesn't along the funnel, and you can get some pretty good insights from that. Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. That was really interesting. A bit of a first for us there on Inside HR, doing a live demo, and it looks like a really, really great system. Just to mop up that poll that you were talking about. So the second question, remember, we asked, what will be your next step in creating a more diverse and inclusive recruitment process? 19% saying an internal D&I training program. 32%, just under a third, saying that they want to reach new talent pools through different channels. Just 1% sourcing a suitable solution to help. So maybe we've given them the idea already. So there we go. Hopefully that's been successful. Restructuring the whole recruitment process, as you mentioned, 6%, that's held out there. And then 39% saying a combination of all of the above, or some of the above. Shannon, to bring you back in, just before we move off that and we move into questions, the 39% saying all of the above, is that been sort of your experience? It's not one lever here. It's pulling quite a few of them to make this work.
That's a great point, James. There are so many different facets that we can take and unpack, that to say I'm only going to concentrate on this one thing may be a bit misguided. So yeah, trying multiple things is going to be where the magic happens. Now, the challenge with that is that if you do see success, you may not know exactly where it's coming from. Which lever did I pull? So to Amber's point, being able to track how you're progressing and how you're making progress is going to be helpful. And also sometimes it will take a little bit of time to see your efforts pay off. So I hate to sound, kind of like a downer, but patience is also important as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's move it into questions then. We've had some great ones come in from our audience. Thank you so much to those of you that have typed out questions, and it's not too late to do that. We'll try and get through as many as possible. Some interesting thoughts here. There's a couple here that talk about one of the areas that maybe perhaps we haven't touched on so far on diversity, which I know is on the agenda in this country, particularly in the company I work for offers an internship program specifically targeting this particular part of the population, is talking about neurodiversity. It says here, I haven't heard any mention of D&I in relation to neurodiverse individuals. So in this country, we would talk about the term we would use for young people going through schools specifically dedicated to neurodiversity would be SEND, which is special educational needs and disability. We would talk about there. But actually, disability is not the correct word, is it? Because actually, neurodiversity shows a huge amount of ability in certain areas, often disproportionate ability in certain areas. Talk a little bit about how you would approach this at iCIMS, Shannon. It's not the easiest area to navigate because it is an incredibly diverse one.
Right. So good question. I'll tell you that in the States, we're not as far along the diversity path to really incorporate neurodiversity in everything that we're doing. But you're right, it is a very important aspect of the human experience, and being able to work with individuals, like you mentioned, it's not a disability. A lot of times these folks have such a far-reaching understanding of something that I can't even begin to comprehend. And it's how best do we capture that and leverage it so that we can put them in the best place the best situation so that they can succeed. And the thing is, and I see your hand, Amber. I'll turn it over to you in a second. And the other thing is there are so many facets to diversity. Like in one of the classes that I teach, we have a diversity wheel where it starts with your personality, introvert, extrovert, ambivert, and it expands all the way out to your diversity in terms of how you interact with the organization. So yeah, neurodiversity is definitely one of those topics that we are learning more about in the States. And Amber, I think you were going to share as well.
Amber, if you want to come in there as well and talk about how the system you've just demonstrated, does that in any way cater for neurodiverse applicants as well?
Yeah, I think there's a concept here that I kind of danced around, but I would like to kind of double click on it. So the idea of design, when we say it's design led, it's that the tools are there to aid you in whatever diversity means to you. We're not prescribing that you only use it for gender, that you only use it for race, that you only use it for ethnicity. You should 100%, if neurodiversity is important to your business, leverage the tools. So designing means you structure your process and you integrate tools around that will help bring an equitable experience for whatever type of diversity you're looking to promote. So in this case, if you're there's actually a coffee shop down the road near a church that I go to, and they have a coffee shop that's completely staffed with individuals with autism. And it's a beautiful thing. And they've obviously structured their sourcing process, their interview process around those individuals. So, it's all about thinking, how do I design and leverage tools that are going to help me effectively give these candidates the experience that they need based on their level of diversity. So that would be my answer to that.
That's really interesting. Thank you for that, Amber. Quite a few coming in on unconscious bias, and we'll touch on that again shortly. There's one here for you, Shannon, about we talked about the difference between sort of what goes on in a strategy meeting versus what actually happens day to day within business. And one of the words that does crop up when we talk about this at HRreview and Inside HR is the concept of microaggressions. Just firstly, what's your take on that word in general and what that means? And how does an organization encourage a culture that is free from the microaggressions that so many people are talking about at the moment?
Yeah, so for those who may not be familiar, microaggressions are these I put it in quotes, small, subtle slights that happen on a almost nearly daily basis to remind people that there is some level of historical bias between myself and you. And I put them in quotes because they're generally not small. They may be unintentional, but they're generally not small. And the other thing is that the intent usually is not to do that. Sometimes it is, but usually the intent is, hey, I didn't know what was happening. So some of the things that I think that we should do is similar to unconscious biases, being aware of what those microaggressions might be and how they make others feel. Feeling comfortable, being able to voice your concern. And, you, James, you may say, hey, Shannon, when you said XYZ, this is how it made me feel. Now, my default posture should not be automatically defensive. Well, I can't believe that you would say that I would do that to you, James. You know me, you know my family. We don't do any of that stuff. So a lot of times what happens is people share how they feel, and then the people they're sharing with tend to get defensive. So think back to the times when we could actually congregate with fewer than 6 feet between us. If James and I are, and this is going to the way before times, if James and I are standing in a line and I accidentally step back, I'm landing on James's toe. Your foot hurts. It was unintentional. Your foot hurts. But I still have to attend it to that hurt. So I can't just step back and step on your toe and you say, hey, Shannon, you're on my foot. And I'm like, well, your foot shouldn't have been under my foot. You shouldn't have been standing so close, so on and so forth. I mean, it seems absurd, but that's exactly what happens when someone comes up to me and says, Shannon, as a Black guy, you are very articulate. And I say, well, when you say things like that, this is how it makes me feel. Oh, that's not what I meant, so on and so forth. So having that environment where you can feel empowered to let folks know how what they said made you feel, and then people looking not at the intent, but looking at the impact. And then the conversations, I think, can move a lot farther along.
That's really interesting, shifting that focus from the intent to the actual impact of what's said or done. That's key. And actually, this next question relates to this slightly. There's someone writing in here. We know as an organization, we have a diverse population surrounding our business. I'm guessing that's geographically.
Mm-hmm.
However, we're finding it difficult to engage specific communities and become known as an equal and diverse workforce. So what they're effectively saying is they've got a lot of these policies in place. They're trying to build a culture and a workforce that is diverse.
Mm-hmm.
But in the local area, they're really struggling to get the attention of, or the sort of the buy-in from different parts of the community,
Right.
whether that's religious or ethnically based. I'm guessing that's the intent of the question, although it could be the whole range, as we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
What and I'll put this to Amber as well, Shannon, but you first. What can you do when you're faced with a situation where you are being, you're not attracting talent from specific pockets of your community?
Right. My first thought would be, that you're doing these things. Does the community know that you're doing these things? So a lot of times we do all of these great and wonderful things, but we're the only ones who know about it because we eat, sleep, and breathe it day in and day out. Do they know about it? So maybe interacting with them and saying, hey, here's who we are. What are your thoughts about us? So, there's how I see myself. There's how others see me. And then there's this motion in between where the truth kind of lies. So I may see myself as fair and equitable, but in having conversations with that community, do they feel the same way? And Amber, I'm sure can add.
Yeah, it sounds like what Shannon's saying there is actually it's about who you're talking to and where. Mm-hmm. We're talking about vacancies and career prospects, where you're advertising and where people can access your recruitment process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one of the things that I would recommend is that obviously you have the community, and if you post a job ad, you're not really tailoring it to that community. So my first thing would be, you have to figure out what groups, affinity groups we would call them. And I just mean like from a product design perspective, what affinity groups exist in those communities, and you have to build relationships with them. But it doesn't start there. From a technology perspective, we have D&I templates that are for your career sites that are designed to specifically dedicate and express transparency with everything you're doing about your business. You can even go as far as sharing your representation or lack thereof in the different areas that you're focused on, and let them know you have a plan to commit. And something that we're doing at iCIMS using our own technology is then hosting, once we have these relationships with these affinity groups, we host virtual events, and we use our employee resource groups to dynamically campaign to these people to let them know that there's a place for them to belong when they get here. And so those results are effective, because it's not enough just to advertise. You really have to execute and follow this through end to end for it to work.
That's really interesting, and this sort of then links into that a little bit, because your demo, wonderful demo, took us up to sort of where you would then do a telephone screen interview or call someone in for an interview back in the days where we used to be able to meet each other. The question here is, once in the interview stage, what's then the best way to tackle that unconscious bias, or potentially call out those sort of internalized bias patterns that can start to emerge in an organization before you realize it? What's the next step from what you showed us, Amber, that helps remove those, or at least
exactly
play them down?
Exactly. It's just like, I just bought a house and there was like some termite damage, and it's like, well, if they only replace the wood, it would just like kind of perpetuate itself, right? So you have to replace the wood, you have to inject treatment into the soil. So this is like a very similar thing, where it's not enough just to have resume redaction. So that's why we talk about the journey. So the next step after you would redact it, hopefully as part of your onboarding process for managers and all interviewers, they get trained, someone like yourself, James or Shannon, on these unconscious biases. But even that's not enough. That's table stakes, right? So the next thing is understanding who's on your interview panel. Is your interview panel diverse? And look at analytics over time that show how did the dynamics of who was on the interview panel impact who got hired. And then obviously everyone should be providing some sort of consistency and structure to what you ask based on the interview. But we believe diversity of an interview panel is key, and there's a way that you do that with our technology as well.
We've just got time for just one more, perhaps. It's easy. I'm just struggling to work out whether this is a UK audience member or whether this is a US audience member. I'm thinking it's UK because you guys wouldn't term it as public sector necessarily. I think that's quite a British phrase. There is a legal requirement to publish and analyze workforce data across protected groups and how representative the organization is of the community it serves. How do you think that would work for private companies as well and for organizations across the board? Is that something you would encourage to, I think you said earlier, Amber, to, part of accessing different communities could be talking about your makeup?
Absolutely. This is what everyone should be doing. You need to publish where you are. No one's looking for perfection. We know D&I is like a new thing we all want to improve. So candidates aren't going to look and be like, oh my goodness, I didn't even expect this. Publish the data and put a plan in place to improve, and it'll go a long way.
Brilliant. That is our hour, unfortunately. Shannon and Amber, thank you so much for joining me. I keep tripping over it. I was about to say this morning where you are. Thank you so much for doing that. If you want more information on iCIMS and what they offer, please do click on the attachment tab. There's also a survey in there where you can give direct feedback to Amber about her demo that she gave you earlier. So please do get involved with that. If you missed any part of this, you can always go back and listen again in about 20 minutes time, I think, when that's rendered and on the Bright Talk platform or through the HRreview website. And join us next week, Thursday, the 18th of March, back at our usual time of 11 GMT, I should say, where we'll be examining digital transformation in HR together with SD Works. Until then, have a wonderful week. And from everyone here on both sides of the Atlantic, thank you for joining us here on Inside HR. And
all right. Thank you very much. Enjoy your day.